Villisca, Iowa, June 10, 1912. A town of just 2,000 people in the heart of America's heartland. The kind of place where nobody locked their doors, where children played in the streets until dark, where everyone knew their neighbors by name. It was a Sunday night. The Children's Day program had just ended at the local Presbyterian church. Families walked home through the warm summer air. Laughter echoed off the storefronts on Main Street. The streets were quiet by 10. By midnight, the town of Villisca was asleep. The summer heat had settled into the fields and the houses sat dark and still. But inside one white clapboard house on East 2nd Street, something unspeakable was about to happen. Something that would shatter this community and haunt it for more than a century. 8 people went to sleep that night in the Moore house. None of them would ever wake up. And by the time the sun rose on Monday morning, Villisca would become the site of one of the most brutal mass murders in American history. Josiah Moore was 43 years old, a respected businessman who ran a successful implement dealership in town, a church leader, a devoted father. His wife Sarah was 39, known for her warmth and hospitality. They had 4 children, Herman, age 11, Catherine, age 10, Boyd, age 7, and Paul, the youngest, at just 5 years old. That Sunday evening, the Moore family attended the Children's Day program at their church. It was a community tradition. The children performed songs and recitations, and the whole town turned out. After the program, 2 of the Moore's neighbors asked to spend the night. Ina Mae Stillinger, age 8, and her older sister Lena, age 12. Sarah Moore said yes, of course. The Stillinger girls could share a bed in the downstairs guest room. It would be a fun sleepover after the church program. 8 souls under one roof. A family and 2 guests. An ordinary Sunday night in small-town Iowa. The last ordinary night any of them would ever have. By morning, that White House on East 2nd Street would become the most infamous crime scene in Iowa's history. And those 2 little girls who just wanted to stay over would never go home again. The next morning, Monday, June 11th. The town noticed something strange. The Moore house was silent. The curtains were drawn tight. The livestock hadn't been fed. The chickens hadn't been let out of the coop, and they were making a commotion. Josiah Moore, who was always punctual, who opened his store at the same time every morning, didn't show up. His employees waited. No one came. By 8 in the morning, neighbors were worried. Mary Peckham, who lived next door, walked over and knocked on the doors. No answer. She tried the handles, locked, every single one. Front door, back door, side door, all locked from the inside. She called Josiah's brother, Ross. Ross Moore arrived with a spare key. He turned the lock, pushed open the door, and stepped inside. The first room he saw was the downstairs guest bedroom. 2 small figures lay on the bed, motionless. Blood on the sheets. Blood on the walls. He stumbled backward out of the house and onto the porch. His face was white. He said just 5 words to the people gathered outside. Something terrible has happened in there. Within minutes, the town marshal was called. He walked through the house room by room. What he found upstairs would change Villisca forever. And it would change him too. Every person in the house had been struck in the head with the blunt side of an axe while they slept. The blows were delivered with devastating force, crushing skulls and killing most victims instantly. Josiah and Sarah Moore were in their upstairs bedroom. Josiah had been struck first, over 30 times. His face was unrecognizable. Sarah lay beside him, killed in her sleep before she could even turn over. Their 4 children lay in a row in the adjacent room, side by side in 2 beds. Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and little Paul, all struck the same way. The 2 Stillinger girls were downstairs in the guest room. Lena had defensive wounds on her arms, suggesting she may have woken briefly. She may have been the only one who saw the killer's face. The weapon was Josiah's own axe, taken from the family woodshed. But the details that disturbed investigators most weren't the wounds. It was everything else. Every mirror in the house had been covered, draped with clothing, towels, or pieces of cloth. Even a small decorative mirror on a dresser. The killer had methodically covered every reflective surface in the house. A bowl of bloody water sat on the kitchen table. The killer had washed their hands before leaving. A 2-pound slab of uncooked bacon was found on the floor near the downstairs bedroom, wrapped in a towel. Its purpose was never explained. The ceilings were gouged where the axe had been swung upward between blows. The crime scene was chaos before investigators even arrived. Word spread through Villisca like wildfire. Dozens and then hundreds of townspeople came to the house. They walked through the rooms. They touched the bodies. They moved objects. They picked up the axe. Someone even took a piece of Josiah Moore's skull as a souvenir. The local marshal, Hank Horton, had no training in forensics. In 1912, the science of crime scene investigation barely existed. There was no protocol for preserving evidence, no system for documenting a scene before it was disturbed. By noon, over 100 people had trampled through the Moore house. The National Guard was eventually called in to keep crowds back, but by then the damage was catastrophic. Any fingerprints, footprints, hair, fibers, or trace evidence had been contaminated beyond recovery. The axe, which should have been the most critical piece of physical evidence, had been handled by at least a dozen people before anyone thought to preserve it. Photographs were taken by a local photographer, but many objects had already been moved from their original positions. The investigation was compromised from the very first hour, and that failure, that irreversible destruction of evidence, would haunt every single attempt to solve this case for the next 112 years. Suspicion spread through Villisca like a disease. Neighbor looked at neighbor with new eyes. Over 100 suspects were investigated in the weeks and months that followed. The first and most prominent suspect was Frank Fernando Jones, a powerful local businessman, a state senator, and Josiah Moore's former employer. Moore had worked for Jones's implement company, but left to start his own competing business, and took many of Jones's customers with him. Jones was furious. The rivalry between them was well known in town. Some believed Jones hired a man to carry out the killings. That man was William Mansfield, a drifter and alleged hired killer with a history of violence. Mansfield was reportedly seen in Villisca on the day before the murders. He left town early the following morning before the bodies were discovered. A private detective named James Newton Wilkerson spent years building a case against Jones and Mansfield. He gathered testimony, tracked Mansfield's movements, and tried to connect the dots. But when the case finally went to a grand jury, the evidence wasn't strong enough. Witnesses were unreliable. Alibis were shaky but unbroken. And some believed the political connections of Senator Frank Jones shielded him from prosecution. The grand jury disbanded without indictments. Villisca's prime suspects walked free. Then came Reverend George Kelly, an English-born traveling preacher who had attended the Children's Day program at the Moore family's church that very Sunday night. Kelly was an odd figure, known for erratic behavior, strange outbursts, and a history of mental instability. He had been treated in institutions before. After the murders, Kelly reportedly sent a bizarre letter to authorities that seemed to contain a veiled confession. He described the crime in unsettling detail. He also reportedly told a fellow minister that he had been visited by visions from God commanding him to slay the wicked. Kelly was arrested in 1917, 5 full years after the murders. His trial was a national sensation. Newspapers from New York to San Francisco covered it. The prosecution argued Kelly was a religious fanatic who killed the Moore family in a frenzied, delusional episode. A man driven by dark visions who believed he was doing God's work. The defense argued his confession was coerced, his mental state was fragile, and that he was nothing more than a convenient scapegoat for a town desperate for answers. The first trial ended in a hung jury. The jurors could not agree. The second trial, held shortly after, returned a verdict of not guilty. George Kelly walked free in 1918. No one else was ever charged with the murders. The case went cold, and Villisca was left with nothing but questions and suspicion. For more than a century, investigators, historians, and amateur sleuths have revisited the Villisca case. And one theory keeps resurfacing: the serial axe murderer theory. Between 1911 and 1912, a string of eerily similar axe murders swept across the American Midwest and South. In Colorado Springs, 6 people were killed in their sleep with an axe. In Ellsworth, Kansas, an entire family was slaughtered the same way. In Paola, Kansas. In Monmouth, Illinois. The list went on. The pattern was chilling and consistent. Families targeted at night, the blunt side of an axe used as the weapon, mirrors covered, doors locked from inside, no robbery, no apparent motive. The killings followed the railroad lines. A traveling killer who arrived in town, struck in the night, and vanished by morning. Some researchers have linked as many as 24 murders to a single killer during this period. A man named Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the Villisca victims, was convicted of axe murders in Columbia, Missouri, and matched the profile almost exactly. But he was never formally charged in connection with Villisca. The serial killer theory remains one of the most compelling explanations. A ghost on the rail lines, a shadow passing through small-town America. But it has never been proven. The Villisca axe murder house still stands today. The white clapboard home on East 2nd Street has been carefully restored to its 1912 appearance. The wallpaper, the furniture, the layout, all painstakingly recreated. It's now a museum, open to the public, and one of the most visited true crime locations in the country. Visitors and paranormal investigators report hearing children's voices in the upstairs rooms, footsteps on the stairs when no one is there, objects moving on their own, cold spots in the bedrooms where the children were found. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, there's no denying the weight of what happened inside those walls. 8 people, 6 of them children, the youngest just 5 years old, killed in their beds by someone who covered the mirrors, washed their hands in a bowl of water, and walked out into the Iowa night. The town of Villisca never fully recovered. Neighbors suspected neighbors for decades. Families moved away. Friendships ended. The trust that had held this small community together was shattered in a single night. More than 100 years later, the wound has never fully healed. Who killed the Moore family and the Stillinger girls? Was it a jealous business rival who hired a drifter to do his dirty work? A mentally unstable preacher driven by dark visions? A serial killer riding the rails from town to town, leaving a trail of shattered families behind him? Or was it someone else entirely? Someone who has never been named, never been suspected, never been found. The evidence was destroyed before it could be properly collected, trampled by 100 boots before anyone understood what they were looking at. The suspects were investigated but never convicted. The trials ended without justice. The grand juries disbanded. 8 people went to sleep in that house on June 10, 1912. A father, a mother, 4 children, and 2 little girls who just wanted to spend the night. And to this day, no one has ever been held accountable for what happened to them. The axe was left leaning against the wall in the downstairs bedroom. The mirrors were covered. The doors were locked from the inside, and the killer disappeared into the American night, never to be seen again. This case remains open. This is Cold Vault.